What's going on at the New Zealand Herald? Well, lots.
NZME's top brass now have another more acute problem. A billionaire who's backed alternative online news outlets here has bought a decent chunk of the company, and now he wants to take control of the whole thing.
And the concern here is that we clearly have an individual who is highly motivated to take control of a major media entity in New Zealand, who is doing so quite clearly with the intent of promulgating a particular political perspective.
I'm a bit worried about where the Herald's going.
The owner of the Herald, NZME, is dealing with rapidly developing events behind the scenes. As a rich Canadian Kiwi with plenty of ideas about what he wants to be reading in the paper, makes a bid for control of the board. Directors of the company have fired back. There may be a counter bid from the other side of the political spectrum, and the company's annual shareholders meeting has been delayed for more than a month, until the beginning of June. At the same time, senior journalists are leaving after a restructure announced in February.
The union representing journalists is describing the loss of 30 editorial jobs at the New Zealand Herald as a blow for media and democracy. The newspaper's publisher, NZME, announced the job cuts today, which include the loss of at least 7 experienced senior journalists.
The redundancies include the loss of several senior reporters, including political editor Claire Trevett, investigative journalist Nicholas Jones, and specialist science writer Jamie Morton.
One of the other concerns as well are the very clear signals that NZME is putting out here about journalistic content being far more linked to the clicks and the advertising revenue that generates. We all understand that this is a commercial organisation, but it is also a news media organisation. It is part of our fourth estate.
And new technology is playing a bigger role in shaping the Herald website.
They also plan to roll out AI to shape the Herald's homepage, and all that really will change what we see and read in the future.
They were a bit vague about this, but they did say there will always be human oversight across all content and sections of the homepage. They're always going to be curated by editors. We constantly review our automation tools based on newsroom expertise and evaluation.
I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detailed, the ABCs of what's going on at the 162-year-old publication that, although Auckland-based, sees itself as the country's de facto national masthead. Newsroom co-owner Tim Murphy, who was once the editor, then editor-in-chief of the Herald, is across developments, as they say, and I asked him about the changes that readers will notice first. The headlines look different, and some stories don't get moved off the front page as quickly as they used to.
Oh, you've noticed. Yes, AI, the robots, the machines have taken over most of the New Zealand Herald website. As an advance this year, they have actually recently put off about 15 online editors, people who would assess and process and curate on that website. So now you're getting, in almost all, but probably about 3 of the top positions on the website as you're reading, you're getting served to you what a machine or the AI algorithm anticipates that you will read and be interested in. If you were to tell, and they're surveying at the moment, the Herald what your own particular interests are, it'll refine that even more, and you'll sort of get dominant flow of content will be the things that you're interested in. So the Herald will change per person reading it.
So not everybody sees the same headlines on the Herald?
They won't, as this comes in more. As it gets more personalised, there'll be positions that serve up to you what your preferences are.
So you might not be able to say to somebody, did you see that front page story on the Herald, because it might not appear for them.
I imagine their biggest ones they'll want to keep in position and everyone will see them. But yeah, it's going to be a slightly different experience. The argument is that it's better, that people respond more and engage more with content that they've previously wanted to see. The counter argument is that a lot of people will be served up material they have clicked on, but it might be a crash on the motorway, bad weather, celebrity news from here or overseas, court cases that are particularly gruesome or alluring, that kind of thing. So it might not be as important if you were judging that, but it was something that you have clicked on and flicked on, and it'll come back to you.
And this is something that RNZ's Media Watch team, Hayden Donnell and Colin Peacock, picked up on.
Potentially, it'll mean that viewing the Herald site will be different for each person, depending on their preferences. So, for instance, if you go to the site, Colin, and you're always clicking on Harry and Meghan stories,
Right?
which is pretty true to life,
Okay.
you'll be served up maybe 15 of those stories, and because that's so it's kind of like a social media algorithm situation.
So it just starts to be a different experience soon. It's deliberate by NZME, the owner of the Herald. They've said it in their financial reports to the market. This is what they're working on to, in their view, get more people reading more of the content they put there.
But isn't this the complaint with Facebook, that you create your own algorithm and you then end up in this little sheltered world where you don't venture outside your bubble?
Partly, yeah. That this echo box effect they talk about, that you're just sitting there hearing people and seeing things that you want to or have seen in the past. I guess with a news site, they will obviously keep some spots on their side and some strands of content visible to all because it's important and because it'll get big reads as well.
So you and I know what it's like to sit there and think of the perfect headline, and then we had to learn how to do SEO, search engine optimization, get those keywords into the headline, and now a machine's doing it.
Yeah, so there might be some headlines that say, "Hey, Alexia, you'll like this." No, not quite. But, it'll anticipate, I think the headlines and the content, the stories, the paragraphs, the introductions and so on will be still news reports by news journalists. It's how those things are then served, I think, in the first instance, rather than so how they get from the journalist to your eyeballs is what the intervention is.
Which does bring in more hits because they'll presumably design it so they feature highly on Google searches.
Yes, I imagine they will, and that means that, more people will get served it in search as well as by just discovery on either your own phone or what's notified to you.
So it's the end of punning headlines.
Oh, who knows? Some abstract, clever headlines might not feature anymore, yeah.
It's a bit sad.
Could be. It'll be sad for those who write them. Whether those who read them will be sad is another thing.
Well, this is it too. And there's a lot happening in the Herald at the moment that the average reader won't notice and actually won't care about. So the big thing, I guess, that you've been doing a lot of reporting on is these moves behind the scenes to control the board. Now, can we talk about that? Because there's a Canadian billionaire living in New Zealand who wants to drag the paper off to the right. There's rumours that there's a private consortium trying to drag it back to the left. There's a counteroffer. What is going on?
Well, yes, a very wealthy, whether he's a billionaire is yet to be determined, Canadian migrant living in Takapuna, Jim Grennan, has for some time had some concerns about the left-leaning New Zealand media, not just the Herald, since COVID days, and has been looking at a sort of a media move. He launched and supported a site called NZNE, News Essentials, and a newsletter called The Centrist, to elevate some of the material that he and others thought needed to get out there and be non-left material, if you like, and to challenge orthodoxies.
Like anti-vax stuff.
Some of it is.
Auckland-based Canadian Jim Grennan has told the company's board he wants to remove most of the current directors. Concern is now growing amongst journalists and staff about a possible move or a shift in editorial direction.
If you're having owners that have a very activist orientation coming on board, perhaps wanting seats on the NZME board and want to push the media in a particular way, as we've seen with Jeff Bezos, that is alarming for democracy.
Some of it's questioning of what they see as sort of a accepted orthodoxy that the Labor government, a left government, brought in a whole lot of things, and therefore most of those things need challenging now and before. And so some of them, yes, the vaccination and mandate policies after COVID and the pandemic, climate change, gender issues, treaty issues. So it's sort of a range of things, and generally sort of culture war in terms of foreign affairs issues and others that now this thinking needs challenging, and that the media's is left and has gone left, and this is bringing balance back.
It sounds Trumpian.
Well, sort of, and balance becomes a word that is inarguably virtuous. We all want balance, but one person's balance is another person's flaw, or whatever. The ceiling is a flaw. It's which side of that you're looking at. This guy has finally declared his hand by buying 10% of NZME, which owns the Herald and News Talk ZB and radio stations, and One Roof, a property site. But the Herald is the target, I think, and it's regarded as the biggest voice that can do with changing the debate in New Zealand back that way. Grennan says it's business issues, not editorial or content issues he's most interested in, and they probably go hand in hand, but the incumbent board of 5 directors says, well, look, we believe actually in performance in business, that NZME's done better than New Zealand, Australian and some other regional media firms recently. It's all been tough for everybody, and they've done okay. So he's playing a business move, wants now to control the whole board with his 10% holding and some allies who he says make up to 47%. So this shareholding move is to control the board. You control the board, you control the executives, they control the editorial content. That's the theory.
It's a theory, but how real is it? How staunch is that wall between the newsroom and the people who run the paper?
Until this era, you mentioned Trump, but it's much wider than Trump. Until this era, there was a pretty strong delineation here and very much a strong delineation in places like the States, where the sort of the business side and the editorial side were very, very rigorously, almost constitutionally defended. And here it was too. The Herald has always been owned by wealthy people. Let's not kid ourselves here. And those wealthy people wanted to make money out of it. And they wanted to make money by, attracting the biggest audiences. So follow that, and you get to the same theory that this new guy can sort of talk. But in the past, there was a regard for and a respect for what's called editorial independence, where the editor who runs the journalists and the content can make calls without being told what stories or what angles or what people should feature or what editorial stances of the editor in what the old editorials in papers could be taken. So the editor would not seek permission from the chief executive, and the chief executive wouldn't seek it from the board.
So Michael Horton never came down to your office and tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Oi, mate."
No, and I was after him, but no, the Irish billionaire who owned us in my time didn't either. Where the control comes in for a board over a company that runs news and then the editorial side is in how much resourcing it's prepared to pony up. And if you cut the resourcing of a organisation, then it's going to cut the capacity and the ability to do certain things. You can expect from a board and from a management in a news organisation that those people will want the highest audiences and the most response, therefore, for advertisers. So if you're doing really dull, boring stuff that no one's reading, then management would act, but the board would be aware as well, and they'd therefore change someone out as editor in that regard. Now, that hasn't happened, but that's the theory. But it's because of the business or the financial impact, rather than that you're not taking a stance that agrees with their political views on anything in particular, politics, but right down to those culture issues we've been talking about. So that's what the theory was. This is different now. This is a guy who has had direct influence on these other smaller news outlets, who is critical of the media and the Herald's supposed kind of left stance.
But is that true? I mean, there are surveys, aren't there, that perception surveys that put, for example, ZB a little bit right and Radio New Zealand a little bit left, but the Herald always tended to come kind of in the middle?
The Herald's sort of in the middle and historically has been. I think it's perceived by whoever's government or party or politics is in the ascendancy or incumbent is perceived by them to be critical and against them.
Which is their job.
Yeah, but people don't understand that. Partisan people, tribal people are almost hurt that their view is not the accepted view of reporting or commentary at that time. And it's, if you look on social media, the number of people saying the Herald is far right and right-wing is equal, if not more, than those saying it's left-wing. People see it as a vehicle of capitalism and the status quo and the powerful and so on. And then other people see it as, taking the government's truth from the podium of truth from Jacinda and so on. And so it's just in the eye of the beholder. I think the Herald is eclectic in its views, in its things it calls out. I think the journalists are not any one particular wing, if you like, or strand. Certainly not party political. Probably most journalists, most places are, quotes, progressive in the sense that they like to see that things that are freedoms, justice, that openness rather than closed or secret.
Which can be interpreted as being a little bit left.
Yeah, and anti-bullying, challenging power is an intrinsic part of journalism. And in those regards, you could say people are progressive, is what I'd call it. But I don't think party political left, really.
What about this dictum that the Herald is going to set a new tone to help New Zealand thrive, was the quotes used. What is that going to do?
So that was the incumbent Herald and board and management and its editorial team declaring that they're going to set a new tone for New Zealand this year, ahead of this other guy coming in and making his bid, and with a much more stark approach to that sort of thing.
It's hard to read it exactly what it means, but the way I interpret it is that they're going to be more positive about business, champion the private sector more.
Do you think that's a way of pleasing their investors?
Yeah, quite possibly.
But that was very weird, actually. It was highlighted in the company's financial report to the market before they even highlighted their financial results. It was right up front, it said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to set a new tone. We're going to highlight success. We're going to sort of promote positivism. And again, none of those things really in themselves, if each one of them you could say, oh, yeah, I agree with that. That's something you could support. It's just really whether any media organisation should be setting its task to change the tone, change your tone, change the public's tone, change what's going on out there. Now,
yeah, because what if the story of the day doesn't fit that tone?
Well, they'd say, well, of course that won't be binding on that. It's just a general kind of vibe rather than a specific thing. It's just weird. You'd have to trust that many of the journalists and editors wouldn't have let it compromise news.
There is still a real connection to reality and a huge long history and a proud history of factual reporting at the Herald.
And I think that's probably so. But as a company and as a sort of a title or masthead or platform for news, it just seemed a bit social engineering's too hard, too specific, but along those lines where we're going to sort of make things change for you, whether you like it or not.
And, it used to be that the Herald was an Auckland paper with sort of fingers to the top of that North Island, really. But I guess with its digital arm now, you could really say the Herald is a national paper in some ways.
Yeah, they tried to call themselves New Zealand's Herald as a sort of a slogan for a while for that reason, that they want to have a national footprint and scope and readership. Stuff is obviously slightly bigger as a news platform, but they're pretty much of a muchness with their audience. And when you add in NZME's News Talk ZB with a huge audience and all their radio stations that take that news from the Herald and News Talk ZB, it's a very large voice out in New Zealand. So
what it does is important.
Oh, it's important, and it's got to be valued, and it's got to be sort of cherished. And people should be watching and should be scrutinising what would be owners or investors intend beyond their money and getting money out. Yeah.
Some of the tone of the stories that are coming through about Jim Green on it are fearful. I think that what he says may infect the writing on the Herald. How confident are you that the journalists will carry on business as usual no matter what he says?
Well, it depends, A, whether he succeeds, and he might not, because he's got 10% and he's got some others with him. But already he's saying he's seeing some of them, quotes, somewhat backpedaling, some of the people who'd been talking to. So what that means quite, and also he criticised the chief executive of NZME who run the Herald, dismissed him sort of, and then did 180 degrees and said, oh, no, actually he can come on the board as well. So you kind of, that indicated to me a little bit of weakness, and you've got to wonder from the start whether someone with a lot of money but only buying 10% of something is kind of trying to bluff the board, the existing board, to sort of give up, put their hands up and walk away. And they might now have found a bit of a voice and be pushing back a bit. So he's got to get control. But should he do so, and should he follow through on the kinds of messaging that he's been part of in the past about media and about the Herald, you'd think then that some senior people might walk. It wouldn't be unthinkable for the editor to change, whether that'd be sudden or after a bit of time. And then from there, it's a question of what you focus on and what that board tells the new chief executive, probably tells the new editor, is their focus. And so we'll be focusing more on questioning some of the science or the climate change or the gender thing or the culture issues, or taking a different view of aggression internationally or whatever, and EVs and all that sort of stuff. So, it might be a direction of topic rather than particular story-by-story thing. But over time, there would be expected to be a change. And I think while many of the journalists will keep doing straight and honourable, journalism, there is a fear among the Herald journalists and among others that this will distort the kinds of, guidelines and rails that they've always worked to.
Where does this leave the reader? Will readers notice much change when they open the paper or when they flick into their screens?
Well, progressively they're going to soon anyway, with some of this change with AI deciding what goes where and what gets prominent for you. They'll notice a bit of change because fewer items are planned and fewer staff to do them. So that's already happening irrespective. After the change of board one way or the other in early June, there could be quite demonstrable change as well, obviously in sort of an overall tone and a kind of a menu, the subject areas, the emphasis. And if that fails, there could be the incumbent, sort of some of the board members taking a different stance because of the shock of this challenge, because of all the debate that's been held about whether their company and their paper and their site is fair and whether it's, advancing New Zealand or not. So I would expect there to be quite a different style of Herald one way or the other in the second half of this year.
So for readers of the news in New Zealand, is the Herald still, it used to be so trustworthy, such a journal of record. Does it still hold that place in the sort of pantheon of news?
I think it's up there still. It hasn't, and despite what some of the critics, financial critics and investors and so on are saying now, it still holds a really strong place in New Zealanders, you go overseas, New Zealanders, they're talking about what they've seen on the Herald or stuff maybe, but, it still holds that national voice, and I think it's likely to do so because it's just so big now when it's coupled with all the other elements in NZME.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by Phil Benge and produced by Gwen McClure. Thanks to Tim Murphy. I'm Alexia Russell. Mā te wā.